In the Golden Empire of ancient Persia, where power flowed from a single throne and the fate of nations rested in royal hands, a young orphan girl with luminous eyes and a hidden heritage would ascend to become queen and stand between her people and annihilation. Our story unfolds in the magnificent citadel of Susa, heart of the Persian Empire, where the Jewish people lived as exiles under the reign of the mighty King Xerxes. Among them dwelt a young woman of extraordinary beauty named Esther, also called Hadassah in the tongue of her ancestors, who would rise from obscurity to save her entire nation from genocide. The marble columns of the palace gleamed with reflected torchlight as King Xerxes reclined among his nobles on the seventh day of feasting. Wine flowed like rivers through the palace gardens of Susa, and the air hung thick with the mingled scents of roasted meats, exotic spices, and perfumed oils. For 6 days, the king had entertained the people of his citadel with unparalleled generosity, displaying his magnificence to all who would witness it. Now, on this final evening, his heart swollen with pride and loosened by wine, the king desired one final exhibition of his wealth. "Bring Queen Vashti before me," he commanded his 7 eunuchs, his voice carrying across the celebration. "Let her wear her royal crown, that all may see her beauty, for she is lovely to behold." The eunuchs bowed and departed swiftly, their footsteps echoing through the palace corridors as they made their way to the queen's quarters where Vashti hosted her own banquet for the women of the palace. They delivered the king's command with utmost formality, expecting immediate compliance as had always been the custom. But Queen Vashti refused. The word came back to the king like a thunderclap in a clear sky. Xerxes, ruler of 127 provinces, conqueror of nations, lord of an empire stretching from India to Kush, had been defied by his own wife before his assembled court. The laughter and music died away as all eyes turned toward the king, whose face had darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His rage was immediate and terrible. To be refused was humiliating enough, but to be refused publicly, before the princes and nobles who looked to him as the ultimate authority in all matters, this was an insult that struck at the very foundation of his power. The king's hands trembled as he called for his wise men, those who understood the times and knew the laws and customs of the Persians and Medes. "According to law," he demanded, his voice tight with barely contained fury, "what must be done to Queen Vashti for not obeying my command?" The 7 nobles exchanged glances, reading the dangerous mood of their sovereign. Memucan, first among them, stepped forward with calculated words designed to transform the king's personal humiliation into a matter of state security. "Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but all the nobles and peoples throughout your provinces," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "When word of the queen's conduct reaches all women, they will despise their husbands and say, 'King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come.' This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way, and there will be no end of disrespect and discord." The other nobles murmured their agreement, nodding gravely as Memucan continued. "If it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Let the king give her royal position to someone better than she." The proposal pleased the king and his nobles. In his wounded pride and wine-fogged judgment, Xerxes saw the wisdom of making an example that would echo throughout his empire. He issued the decree that very night, dispatching letters to every province in its own script and to every people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be master in his own household. The royal crown was removed from Vashti's head. The throne beside the king stood empty, and in that vacancy, destiny began to stir, preparing to elevate an orphan girl to a position she had never imagined, and a purpose that would save a nation from the edge of extinction. When the king's fury finally cooled, regret settled in its place like morning mist. The empty throne beside him stood as a constant reminder of what his rage had cost him, and his advisers watched him grow melancholy with each passing day. Sensing the moment, the king's personal attendants approached him with a carefully considered proposal. "Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins throughout all your provinces," they suggested. "Appoint commissioners in every region to bring them to the citadel of Susa, to the harem under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch in charge of the women. Let beauty treatments be given to them, and then let the young woman who pleases the king become queen instead of Vashti." The proposal pleased King Xerxes, and the decree went forth immediately. Throughout the 127 provinces, from the mountains of Media to the coasts of Ionia, the king's commissioners began their search for the most beautiful young women in the empire. They would be brought to Susa, prepared with the finest treatments the royal treasury could provide, and presented to the king in turn. In the citadel of Susa lived a Jewish man of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He was raising his cousin Hadassah, whom he had adopted as his own daughter after her parents died. The young woman, known also as Esther, possessed a loveliness that transcended mere physical beauty. Her large, luminous eyes held depths of wisdom and kindness, and her graceful bearing spoke of inner strength wrapped in gentleness. When the king's edict reached Susa, Esther was among the many young women taken to the palace and entrusted to Hegai's care. Before she departed, Mordecai drew her close, his weathered hands upon her shoulders, his voice urgent and low. "Tell no one of your people or your family background," he instructed. "Keep your Jewish identity hidden." Esther nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of his words even if she could not yet foresee why this secret would matter so profoundly. From the moment Esther entered the harem, she won Hegai's favor. The chief eunuch, experienced in discerning both beauty and character, recognized something exceptional in this quiet young woman. He promptly provided her with beauty treatments and special food, assigned her 7 chosen maids from the palace, and moved her and her attendants into the best quarters of the harem. Each day, Mordecai walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem, seeking news of how his beloved cousin fared. 12 months passed, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics, as each young woman prepared for her evening with the king. When Esther's turn finally arrived, she requested nothing except what Hegai suggested, displaying a wisdom that further elevated her in his esteem. She won the favor of everyone who saw her, from the lowest servant to the highest official. In the 10th month of the 7th year of his reign, Esther was brought to King Xerxes in the royal palace. The king was attracted to her more than to any of the other women, more than all the virgins who had been presented before him. She won his favor and approval above them all, and in a moment that seemed ordained by powers beyond mortal understanding, he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The king gave a great banquet in Esther's honor, proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces, and distributed gifts with royal liberality. And still, as Mordecai had instructed, Esther revealed nothing of her family background or nationality. The orphan had become a queen, but her true identity remained hidden, a secret that would soon become the hinge upon which the fate of nations would turn. Though Esther now wore the royal crown and dwelt in chambers of purple and gold, Mordecai had not abandoned his vigil. Each day he sat among the officials at the king's gate, watching over her from afar as he had done since her parents departed this world, listening and observing with the careful attention of a guardian who understood that power attracted danger like honey drew flies. It was during one of these watchful hours that fate placed him precisely where he needed to be. The gate bustled with its usual traffic, but Mordecai's practiced ear caught something amiss in the low murmur of conversation near the royal threshold. Two of the king's officers, Bigthan and Teresh, both eunuchs who guarded the entrance to the king's private chambers, stood in shadowed conference, their voices hushed but carrying just far enough for Mordecai to catch fragments of their bitter whispers. What he heard made his blood run cold. The two guards were plotting to assassinate King Xerxes. Their grievances spilled out in careful undertones: perceived slights, denied promotions, the festering resentment of men who stood daily at the doorway to absolute power yet possessed none themselves. They had determined the king must die, and with their access to the royal chambers and knowledge of his routines, they needed only courage and opportunity. Both, it seemed, they had found. Mordecai did not hesitate. Though he owed this Persian king no particular loyalty as a Jewish exile, his integrity would not permit innocent blood to be shed when he possessed the power to prevent it. More than that, he understood that the king's death would cast Esther into chaos and danger from which she might not emerge alive. He rose from his place and made his way to the palace, requesting urgent audience with Queen Esther. When the message reached her, she received him immediately, reading the gravity in his summons. Mordecai disclosed everything: the names of the conspirators, the nature of their plot, the imminent threat to the king's life. Esther acted with decisive wisdom. She went directly to King Xerxes and reported the assassination plot, carefully giving full credit to Mordecai for uncovering the conspiracy. The king commanded an immediate investigation, and under questioning, the guards' lies crumbled like sand. The matter was found to be exactly as Mordecai had reported. Justice was swift and severe. Both conspirators were impaled on wooden poles, their bodies displayed as a warning to any who might consider similar betrayal. And in the king's presence, scribes carefully recorded the entire account in the book of the annals of King Xerxes, preserving for posterity the name of Mordecai the Jew who had saved the king's life. The book was sealed and stored in the royal archives, where it would wait in silence, gathering dust in darkness. Neither the king nor Mordecai could know that this forgotten record would soon become the instrument of salvation, that at precisely the right moment, this testimony of loyalty would be remembered and the course of history would pivot on words written in ink and locked away in shadows. After these events, King Xerxes elevated a man named Haman son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, to the highest position in the kingdom, placing him above all the other nobles. With this honor came a royal decree: all officials at the king's gate were commanded to kneel down and pay homage to Haman whenever he passed. Day after day, as Haman strode through the king's gate, every official prostrated themselves in accordance with the king's command. Robes swept the dust, foreheads touched the ground, voices murmured reverence. Every man bowed, every man except one. Mordecai remained upright. His refusal was neither subtle nor accidental. While others pressed their faces to the earth, Mordecai stood with quiet dignity, his eyes forward, his spine unbowed. The other officials questioned him repeatedly, their voices edged with concern. "Why do you disobey the king's command?" they asked. "Do you not understand the danger?" But Mordecai offered no apology and no compromise. Finally, driven by fear for their own positions, they reported the matter to Haman, mentioning that Mordecai was a Jew. When Haman witnessed Mordecai's refusal with his own eyes, rage consumed him like wildfire. Here was an affront he could not abide, an insult that burned in his chest with every breath. To be denied the homage commanded by the king himself, to be shown such blatant disrespect, it was intolerable. Yet as Haman's fury festered, a terrible ambition took shape. Destroying Mordecai alone seemed insufficient punishment. When he learned that Mordecai was a Jew, his vengeance expanded to encompass an entire people. Why eliminate one man when he could eradicate a nation? Why settle for personal satisfaction when he could achieve complete annihilation? Haman began to plot methodically. In the first month of the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, the pur, that is, the lot, was cast in Haman's presence to determine the most favorable day and month for his scheme. The lots fell again and again until they selected the 12th month, the month of Adar. The date was set. Then Haman went before King Xerxes with words carefully crafted to secure royal approval. There is a certain people dispersed among all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate, he said, his voice smooth with calculated malice. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury. The sum was staggering, a fortune that would fill the king's coffers and fund his ambitions. Xerxes, trusting his highest official and tempted by such wealth, removed his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman. "Keep the money," the king said, "and do with the people as you please." The instrument of genocide had been placed in the hands of hatred. The shadow of death began its descent upon every Jewish man, woman, and child across 127 provinces, and among them, unknown to Haman, walked a queen in the palace who carried their blood in her veins and their fate in her hands. The decree went out swiftly, carried by couriers to every province in its own script and language. On the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews, young and old, women and children, were to be killed, annihilated, and plundered. The edict was posted in Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city was thrown into confusion and terror. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. He stopped at the king's gate, for no one clothed in sackcloth could enter. In every province, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes, their grief echoing across the empire. When Esther's attendants told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to wear instead of his sackcloth, but he refused them. The refusal itself carried a message that chilled her heart. Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai. Hathach went to Mordecai in the open square before the king's gate, and there Mordecai told him everything, the exact amount Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He gave Hathach a copy of the edict to show Esther and instructed him to urge her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. When Hathach reported this to Esther, the weight of the request settled upon her like a burial shroud. She sent back a message, her voice trembling. "All the king's officials know that any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned faces one law, death, unless the king extends the gold scepter and spares their life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to the king." The message revealed her terror and powerlessness. Even as queen, she could not simply enter the king's presence. To do so unsummoned meant death, unless Xerxes chose mercy. And she had not been called for a month, his favor might already be cooling. Mordecai sent back words that would echo through the ages. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" The words struck Esther like lightning, illuminating everything in a single terrible flash. Her crown, her beauty, her elevation from orphan to queen, it had all been leading to this moment. She had been positioned precisely where she needed to be. The choice was now hers: remain silent and safe, or speak and risk everything. Esther sent her final message to Mordecai, and in it, the frightened woman became the courageous queen. Go, gather together all the Jews in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. 3 days and 3 nights passed in darkness and silence. Throughout Susa, the Jewish people gathered in prayer and fasting, their voices lifted in desperate supplication for their young queen who would soon walk into the shadow of death on their behalf. In the palace, Esther and her attendants took neither food nor water, their bodies weakening even as their resolve strengthened. On the 3rd day, Esther bathed and dressed herself in her royal robes. The garments felt heavier than usual, weighted with the significance of what she was about to do. Her maids arranged her hair and placed jewels at her throat, their hands trembling. When she looked at herself in the polished bronze mirror, she saw a queen, but beneath the crown and royal attire, she felt the frightened orphan girl she had always been. Yet she did not turn back. Esther walked through the palace corridors, her footsteps echoing against marble floors. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. Every step brought her closer to the inner court, closer to the moment when her fate would be decided. She thought of her people facing annihilation, of Mordecai who had raised her with such devotion, of the God of her ancestors who had delivered them through impossibilities before. She entered the inner court and stood before the throne room. Through the great doorway, she could see King Xerxes sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance. To advance further without being summoned was to invite death. The law was absolute. Esther took one more breath and stepped into view. King Xerxes looked up and saw Queen Esther standing in the court. Time seemed to suspend itself as their eyes met across the vast chamber. The king's expression was unreadable, and for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Esther did not know whether she would live or die. The courtiers fell silent, watching their sovereign's face for any sign of judgment. Then King Xerxes smiled. Relief and favor flooded his features, and he extended the golden scepter toward Esther. The gesture was unmistakable. She would live. She was welcome. She was safe. Esther approached the throne, her legs weak with relief, and touched the tip of the scepter. The cool metal beneath her fingertips felt like life itself flowing back into her body. She had crossed through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged on the other side. "What is it, Queen Esther?" the king asked, his voice warm with affection. "What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." Esther had prepared for this moment during the long hours of fasting and prayer. She knew she could not simply blurt out her plea. Such matters required delicacy, timing, and wisdom. Her response was careful and strategic. "If it pleases the king, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." The king's smile widened. "Bring Haman at once," he commanded his servants, "so that we may do what Esther asks." The first step had been taken. The door had been opened. And though the path ahead remained treacherous, Esther had survived the moment that should have killed her, and in that survival, hope flickered to life like a flame in darkness. The king and Haman attended Esther's banquet, and as they drank wine, King Xerxes again asked, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." But Esther, with careful wisdom, delayed once more. "If the king regards me with favor, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare. Then I will answer the king's question." Haman left in high spirits, honored and elated. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, still refusing to stand or show him respect, his joy turned to rage. He went home and gathered his friends and wife Zeresh, boasting about his wealth, his sons, and how the king had elevated him above all other nobles. And Queen Esther invited only me to accompany the king to her banquet. She has invited me again tomorrow. Then his face darkened. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife and friends offered ready counsel. Have a pole set up, 75 feet high, and ask the king tomorrow morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go to the banquet and enjoy yourself. The suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole constructed immediately. That night, the king could not sleep. Restless and wakeful, he commanded that the book of the annals be brought and read to him. As the scribe read through the chronicles, he came upon the account of how Mordecai had exposed Bigthan and Teresh's assassination plot. "What honor has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. At that moment, Haman entered the outer court, arriving early to ask about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had prepared. The king called him in. "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Xerxes asked. Haman's heart soared. Who else could the king mean but himself? "For the man the king delights to honor," he said, "bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest. Let them be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man and lead him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" "Go at once," the king commanded. "Get the robe and horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." The words struck Haman like a physical blow. His face went white, his knees nearly buckled. But he could not refuse the king's command. With trembling hands and burning humiliation, Haman got the robe and horse. He robed Mordecai and led him through the city streets, his own voice forced to proclaim, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, dignified and unchanged. But Haman rushed home, his head covered in grief and shame, and told his wife and friends everything. Even as they warned him that his downfall had begun, the king's eunuchs arrived to hurry him to Esther's second banquet, where destiny would complete its reversal. The king and Haman reclined at Queen Esther's second banquet, and as they drank wine, King Xerxes asked once more, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." This time, Esther did not delay. The moment had arrived, the purpose for which she had risked her life. She drew a deep breath and spoke words that would alter the course of history. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition. And spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king's wine cup froze halfway to his lips. "Who is he?" King Xerxes demanded, his voice rising with fury. "Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther turned her gaze toward the man beside the king, and her voice rang out clear and unwavering, "An adversary and enemy. This vile Haman." Terror seized Haman as the king and queen stared at him with horror and accusation. His face drained of color, his hands trembled, his breath came in desperate gasps. King Xerxes rose in furious rage and strode into the palace garden, his mind reeling. His beloved queen was Jewish, one of the very people Haman had marked for destruction. His trusted advisor had orchestrated genocide against the queen herself. The betrayal was monstrous. Haman, seeing that the king had decided his fate, remained behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. In his desperation, he threw himself upon the couch where Esther reclined, grasping at her robes, his voice breaking with pleas for mercy. At that moment, King Xerxes returned from the garden. What he saw ignited his rage anew. "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" he roared. As soon as the words left the king's mouth, attendants covered Haman's face, the sign of a man condemned to death. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs, spoke up. "A pole reaching 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The irony was perfect, the justice poetic. "Impale him on it," the king commanded. So they impaled Haman on the very pole he had prepared for Mordecai. The instrument of his intended triumph became the means of his destruction. The man who had sought to elevate himself above all others fell to the depths of disgrace and death. Then the king's fury subsided. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, and Mordecai came into the king's presence, for Esther had revealed their relationship. The king removed his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, elevating him to the position his enemy had held. Esther appointed Mordecai over Haman's estate. Yet the greatest challenge remained. The decree Haman had issued still stood, sealed with the king's signet ring, and according to the laws of the Persians and Medes, no decree signed by the king could be revoked. The Jews remained under sentence of death, and time was running out to save them. Esther again pleaded with King Xerxes, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite. The king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. "If it pleases the king," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks, "let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman devised to destroy the Jews. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" King Xerxes understood the dilemma. The original decree could not be revoked, it was irrevocable according to Persian law. But there was another way. "Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews as seems best to you," he told Esther and Mordecai, "and seal it with the king's signet ring." The royal secretaries were summoned on the 23rd day of the 3rd month. They wrote out Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces, in the script of each province and the language of each people. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers riding the king's fastest horses. The new decree granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force that might attack them. The day appointed was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the very day Haman had selected for their destruction. The couriers raced out, spurred on by the king's command. When Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen, the city of Susa erupted in celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province where the edict arrived, there was joy and feasting among the Jews, and many people of other nationalities became Jews themselves, because fear of the Jews had seized them. On the 13th day of Adar, the day arrived when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. But the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because fear had seized the people of all nationalities. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them. In Susa alone, they killed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman. Throughout the provinces, 75,000 enemies were killed, though the Jews did not lay hands on the plunder. On the 14th day, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces to celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of Adar as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into celebration. These days were called Purim, from the word pur, because Haman had cast the lot to determine the day of their destruction, but that day had instead become the day of their deliverance. The Jews established it as a custom for themselves and their descendants that they should celebrate these 2 days every year. These days would be remembered and observed in every generation, by every family, in every province and city. And these days of Purim would never cease among the Jews, nor would their memory die out among their descendants. The orphan girl who became a queen had saved her people. The man who refused to bow had been elevated to the highest position in the empire. And the plot designed for annihilation had been transformed into a story of miraculous deliverance that would echo through the ages, a testament to courage, faith, and the belief that each person may be placed exactly where they need to be for such a time as this. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, subscribe for more, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you.